The studio lights burned with that familiar, blinding heat, the kind that makes every drop of sweat feel like a spotlight of its own. And the tension inside the set was so thick, it seemed to suck the oxygen from the air. It was supposed to be a polished, controlled broadcast. Another carefully scripted network appearance where political sparring stayed within the boundaries of polite, TV-friendly jabs. But the instant Jasmine Crockett leaned forward in her chair, eyes locked on Ivanka Trump, with that razor focus she had perfected in countless congressional hearings. Everyone on set knew something was about to shatter. The host, whose voice usually carried the smooth authority of someone in control, faltered mid-question when Jasmine's lips curled into that subtle smile that was never just a smile, which was a signal, quiet declaration that she was about to drop something that would rearrange reputations and rewrite narratives. Ivanka, sitting just opposite, was draped in a meticulously chosen cream-colored suit. Her hands folded neatly on her lap, projecting that practiced poise she had mastered over years of public life. Her eyes flickered toward the cameras every so often, as though measuring how she appeared on millions of screens, as though the approval of that unseen audience could fortify her against whatever was coming. But then Jasmine spoke, her voice calm, steady, threaded with that restrained power that made people lean in without realizing it. "The thing about secrets, Ivanka," she began, "is that they have a way of leaking out no matter how carefully you try to lock them away." A hush fell over the audience, an unnatural quiet, like the stillness before a sudden storm. Ivanka's fingers twitched almost imperceptibly, and she shifted slightly in her seat. "I'm not sure what you're insinuating," she replied. Her tone controlled, but edged with something sharp, defensive, brittle. But Jasmine didn't pause. She reached down to the table, lifted a small black folder, and placed it on the glossy surface between them. The host's eyes darted toward the control booth. Producers gestured wildly as if deciding whether to cut to commercial, but the delay was too long. Jasmine had already clicked it open. "This," she said, sliding a stack of photographs and printed messages into the light, is what happens when the truth decides it's tired of being buried. The images weren't grainy tabloid shots or speculative rumors. They were crisp, undeniable, time-stamped moments, accompanied by text exchanges so explicit in their familiarity that the audience's collective gasp was almost physical. Ivanka's hand shot out, slamming the folder shut, but the damage was already done. The words had been spoken aloud, the pictures had been glimpsed, and in the age of instant social media, even the briefest flash was enough to ignite a firestorm. "This is a lie," Ivanka snapped, her voice rising for the first time, that carefully cultivated composure cracking under the weight of exposure. Her cheeks flushed, her breath quickened, and she turned not to Jasmine but directly to the cameras, pleading her denial to the millions watching. "I have never," but she didn't finish, because Jasmine, without raising her voice, simply said, "America deserves the truth, even when it's ugly." The silence that followed was deafening. It wasn't the quiet of respect, but the stunned stillness of people processing the realization that something irreversible had just unfolded on live television. The air in the studio felt heavier now, as if every molecule was charged with static. Even the cameras seemed to hum louder. Their lenses locked on Ivanka's face, as though they sensed the moment was far too explosive to cut away from. She tried to gather herself, straightening her posture, adjusting the lapel of her suit, forcing her features back into that polished mask the public was used to seeing, but the effort only made the cracks more visible. Her lips trembled with words she hadn't yet decided whether to speak. Her eyes darted from Jasmine to the host, to the audience like a cornered animal searching for an exit. In the control room, panic was in full bloom. Directors shouted over each other, debating whether to pull the feed, while network executives in different time zones barked contradictory orders into earpieces. But Jasmine sat utterly still, the faintest glint in her eyes suggesting she knew she'd landed the blow she came for, and that she wasn't done yet. "These are doctored," Ivanka insisted, her voice pitched high enough to betray the undercurrent, a fear she was fighting to hide. Everyone knows Jasmine will say anything to make herself look. But her words trailed off, when Jasmine reached once more into the folder and withdrew a second set of evidence. This time in the form of handwritten notes, the ink smudged just enough to suggest haste in their creation. She placed them on the table, sliding them just far enough toward Ivanka. The cameras could catch their edges without fully revealing their contents to the at-home audience, an act of deliberate restraint that made the mystery all the more maddening. "I don't have to say anything," Jasmine said quietly. "These say it all." The host tried to interject, stumbling over a question meant to redirect. But Ivanka's gaze was locked on the pages, her pupils dilating as she recognized her own handwriting staring back at her. A faint murmur rose from the audience, the kind of ripple that carries both disbelief and morbid curiosity, and it seemed to press down on Ivanka until she leaned back in her chair, her knuckles white as she gripped the armrests. Energy in the room had shifted entirely. Jasmine was no longer the challenger. She was the gravitational center, pulling every ounce of attention her way. Ivanka's jaw worked soundlessly for a moment before she let out a sharp laugh too loud to brittle, turning toward the audience as if to recruit them to her side. "You're all being played," she declared, her voice wobbling between outrage and desperation. "This is a stunt, a smear campaign. She's trying to destroy me because she knows I again." She cut herself off, perhaps realizing mid-sentence that anything she said could open another door she couldn't close. Jasmine tilted her head slightly, that small, knowing smile returning, and spoke into the silence. "I'm not trying to destroy you, Ivanka. Trying to make sure the truth has a voice, even when it's inconvenient for the powerful." It was in that moment that Ivanka's composure broke entirely. Her eyes glistened, her breath caught, and for the first time in her public life, she looked less like the untouchable daughter of a political dynasty and more like someone cornered by a past she could no longer control. The audience didn't cheer or boo, they just watched, absorbing every flicker of expression, every unsteady breath, knowing instinctively that this was the kind of live television moment that would be replayed, dissected, and remembered for years. Somewhere beyond the glaring lights and the tight semicircle of cameras, the online world had already erupted. Phones buzzed furiously in the audience, a muffled chorus of notification chimes filling the spaces between words and hashtags combining. Ivanka's name with Jasmine's accusations trended so rapidly that newsrooms across the country began breaking into their own broadcasts to cover what was unfolding in real time. In the control room, the producers' initial panic had morphed into a kind of stunned resignation. They knew it was too late to contain this. The genie wasn't just out of the bottle, it was standing in the center of the stage, smiling directly into the lens. Ivanka's phone, sitting face down on the desk beside her, began to vibrate so violently it threatened to slide off, the screen lighting up with calls from numbers she recognized but could not answer. She didn't touch it. She just stared straight ahead, her chest rising and falling too quickly, as if her body had realized before her mind that the scaffolding of control she had built over decades was beginning to collapse. Jasmine, by contrast, seemed carved from stillness, every movement slow, deliberate, as though she were fully aware that millions were studying her face for any sign of overreach. "These affairs," she said finally, enunciating each word as if it were its own sentence, "were not rumor. They were not speculation. They were not invented by political opponents. They're documented, corroborated, and confirmed." Audience gasped again, the startled intake of breath from before, but a deeper, more sustained sound, like a wave rushing in. Ivanka's hand went to her mouth, her eyes glistening in the unforgiving light, and for a fleeting moment it seemed she might get up and walk off the set. The host, sensing the danger of complete derailment, leaned forward and asked a question so soft it was almost drowned by the hum of the lights. "Jasmine, do you have any proof that directly ties these claims to the former president?" Was an attempt to shift focus, but Jasmine met the question head-on. "I didn't come here to make half statements," she replied. "Yes, I do. And no, I won't be bullied into hiding it." She reached into the folder one final time and pulled out a single envelope, its edges worn as though it had been handled countless times. She didn't open it. She simply placed it in the exact center of the table between them and let it sit there, like a loaded weapon everyone could see, but no one dared touch. Ivanka's breathing quickened audibly now, her fingers curling into fists in her lap, and she finally broke her silence with a voice that trembled not with fear alone, but with fury. "You have no right," she said, leaning forward so abruptly. The microphone clipped her first syllable. "You have no right to drag my life, my family, into your little crusade for attention." Jasmine didn't flinch. She simply tilted her head as though weighing the words, and answered, "I'm not dragging anything, Ivanka. It walked here on its own." That line hit harder than any document or photograph could, and the studio, for all its lights and heat and noise, seemed to plunge into a strange stillness, again one that felt final, inevitable, and heavy with the knowledge that the last 20 minutes of television had altered the public landscape in a way neither of them could undo.